Please don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more English story. I remember the first time I realized I was running on fumes. Not the kind where you're just tired, but the kind where you're so far past exhaustion that you don't even recognize yourself anymore. It was a Tuesday, or maybe a Thursday. Honestly, the days blurred together back then. I was sitting at my desk, staring at a screen filled with deadlines, goals, and a to-do list that seemed to grow faster than I could cross things off. My coffee had gone cold, and my chest felt tight, like someone had wrapped a belt around my ribs and was slowly tightening it. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat there, numb, wondering how I'd gotten to this point. How had I let myself become this person? Someone who measured their worth by how much they could accomplish in a day. Someone who felt guilty for taking a breath, let alone a break. It wasn't always like this. There was a time when I loved the hustle. The late nights, the early mornings, the feeling of crossing something off my list, it gave me a rush. It made me feel alive. But somewhere along the way, that rush turned into a weight. The hustle became a grind, and the grind became a cage. I was stuck in a cycle of toxic motivation, where nothing I did ever felt like enough. And the worst part? I didn't even realize it was happening until it was too late. The slippery slope of should, I think it started with the word should. I should be working harder. I should be further along by now. I should be able to handle this. That word became my mantra, my measuring stick, my whip. It didn't matter what I accomplished. There was always something else I should be doing. And if I dared to take a moment for myself, that voice would creep in, whispering, "You're falling behind. You're not good enough. You're failing." It's funny, isn't it? How we can be so cruel to ourselves in ways we'd never dream of being to someone else. If a friend came to me, overwhelmed and exhausted, I'd tell them to rest, to be kind to themselves, to take it one step at a time. But when it came to me, rest felt like laziness. Kindness felt like indulgence. And taking it one step at a time felt like giving up. I didn't know it then, but I was drowning in a sea of expectations, most of which I'd created for myself. And the harder I tried to stay afloat, the deeper I sank. The breaking point. The breaking point came on a day that started like any other. I woke up early, scrolled through my phone to check emails because God forbid I miss something important, and immediately felt that familiar knot of anxiety in my stomach. I dragged myself out of bed, made coffee, and sat down at my desk, ready to tackle the day. But as I stared at my screen, something inside me snapped. It wasn't dramatic. There were no tears, no outbursts, just a quiet, unshakable realization. I can't do this anymore. I didn't know what this was, the endless to-do list, the constant pressure, the feeling that I was always one misstep away from failure. All I knew was that I couldn't keep living like this. Something had to change. The first step was the hardest. It wasn't a grand gesture or a life-altering decision. It was small, almost insignificant. I closed my laptop. For the first time in what felt like forever, I didn't try to power through. I didn't tell myself to suck it up or push harder. I just stopped. I sat there, staring at the blank screen, and let myself feel the weight of everything I've been carrying. And then I did something I hadn't done in years. I took a nap. It sounds silly, I know, but in that moment, it felt revolutionary. For the first time in a long time, I chose myself over my to-do list. I chose rest over productivity. I chose kindness over cruelty. It wasn't a cure-all. It didn't magically fix everything, but it was a start. And sometimes, that's all you need, a small, quiet step in the right direction. The space between. That nap was the beginning of a journey, one that's still unfolding. It's been messy and imperfect, full of setbacks and breakthroughs. But along the way, I've learned something important. There's a difference between toxic motivation and genuine inspiration. Toxic motivation is fueled by fear. It's the voice that tells you you're not enough, that you need to prove yourself, that your worth is tied to what you achieve. It's exhausting, unsustainable, and ultimately destructive. Genuine inspiration, on the other hand, comes from a place of love. It's the spark that lights you up, the pull towards something that feels meaningful and true. It's not about proving yourself. It's about expressing yourself. And it doesn't drain you, it fuels you. The hard part is learning to tell the difference. Because in a world that glorifies hustle and productivity, it's easy to confuse the two. It's easy to mistake the pressure to perform for the desire to create. But they're not the same. And the more I've learned to listen to myself, the better I've gotten at recognizing which is which. The practice of letting go. One of the hardest lessons I've had to learn is that I can't control everything. I can't control how much I get done in a day, how other people perceive me, or whether I'll ever feel enough. What I can control is how I treat myself in the process. It's a practice, not a destination. Some days, I still fall into old patterns. I still hear that voice telling me I should be doing more, that I'm not good enough, that I'm falling behind. But now, I know how to respond. I take a deep breath, remind myself that I'm human, and ask, what do I need right now? Sometimes, the answer is rest. Sometimes, it's a walk outside or a conversation with a friend. Sometimes, it's just sitting with the discomfort and letting it be. And slowly, over time, I've learned to trust that voice, the one that speaks from a place of love, not fear, the gift of imperfection. I used to think that being perfect was the goal, that if I could just get everything right, I'd finally feel okay. But the truth is, perfection is a trap. It's a never-ending chase that leaves you exhausted and empty. What I've learned instead is that there's beauty in imperfection. There's grace in the messy. unfiltered, human parts of life. And there's freedom in letting go of the need to have it all together. It's not easy. Some days, it feels like the hardest thing in the world, but it's worth it. Because on the other side of that struggle is a life that feels alive, a life that's not about proving yourself, but about being yourself. A letter to you, if you're reading this, chances are you felt some version of what I've described. Maybe you're feeling it right now. And if that's the case, I want you to know this. You're not alone. It's okay to feel overwhelmed. It's okay to not have all the answers. And it's okay to take a step back, to rest, to breathe. You don't have to earn your worth through what you accomplish. You are enough, exactly as you are. This journey isn't about getting it right. It's about learning to be kind to yourself along the way. And if you take nothing else from this story, I hope you take that. Be kind to yourself. You deserve it. After that first nap, that small, rebellious act of self-care, I started to notice things. Little things. At first, the way the sunlight filtered through the blinds in the morning, casting soft patterns on the floor. The sound of birds outside my window. A melody I hadn't heard in years because I was always too busy, too distracted, too in my head to notice. I began to carve out tiny pockets of stillness in my day. A 5-minute pause to sit with my coffee instead of gulping it down at my desk. A walk around the block, even if it meant leaving my phone behind. At first, it felt uncomfortable, almost wrong, like I was cheating somehow, skipping out on responsibilities. But slowly, I started to crave those moments. They became my anchor, my reminder that life wasn't just about doing, it was about being. The messy middle, of course, it wasn't all sunshine and birdsong. There were days when the old habits crept back in. Days when I'd find myself hunched over my laptop at midnight, chasing some arbitrary deadline I'd set for myself. Days when the voice in my head would grow loud again, telling me I was lazy, selfish, wasting time. But this time, I didn't let it consume me. I'd learned to recognize that voice for what it was. Fear. Fear of failure. Fear of judgment. Fear of not being enough. And instead of fighting it or feeding it, I'd acknowledge it. I see you. I'd say, but you don't get to drive today. It wasn't about silencing the voice. It was about learning to live alongside it without letting it take the wheel. And slowly, over time, it grew quieter. Not gone, but manageable. Like background noise instead of a deafening roar. The turning point. The real turning point came during a conversation with a friend. We were sitting on our couch, cups of tea in hand, and I found myself opening up in a way I hadn't before. I told her about the pressure I felt, the constant need to prove myself, the exhaustion that never seemed to go away. And instead of offering advice or trying to fix it, she just listened. When I finished, she looked at me and said, You know, you don't have to earn your right to exist. You're allowed to just be. It hit me like a lightning bolt. Simple, profound, and something I'd never truly believed before. I'd spent so much of my life trying to earn my place, to prove my worth, that I'd forgotten the most basic truth. I was enough, just as I was, not because of what I accomplished, but because I existed. That conversation became a touchstone for me. Whenever I felt myself slipping back into old patterns, I'd hear her words in my head. You're allowed to just be. And slowly, I began to believe it. The practice of presence. One of the biggest shifts came when I started practicing presence. Not in a formal, meditative sense, though that's great too, but in small, everyday ways. I'd pause to really taste my food instead of eating mindlessly in front of the TV. I put my phone down and look people in the eye when they talk to me. I take a deep breath before responding to a stressful email, giving myself a moment to choose my words instead of reacting out of fear or frustration. At first, it felt awkward, even unnatural, but over time, it became second nature. And the more present I became, the more I noticed how much beauty there was in the ordinary. A shared laugh with a coworker, the smell of rain on pavement, the warmth of sunlight on my skin. These small moments, once overlooked, became the foundation of my joy. The power of letting go. Letting go was, and still is, the hardest part. Letting go of the need to control everything. Letting go of the idea that my worth is tied to my productivity. Letting go of the belief that I have to be perfect to be loved. But here's the thing. Every time I let go, even just a little, I feel lighter, freer, more like myself. And the more I practice it, the easier it gets. It's not about giving up or settling. It's about making space for what truly matters. The moral. You are enough. If there's one thing I want you to take away from this story, it's this. You are enough. Not because of what you achieve or how much you accomplish, but because of who you are. You don't have to earn your right to exist. You don't have to prove your worth. You are worthy simply because you are. Life is messy and imperfect and beautiful. And you don't have to navigate it perfectly to be deserving of love, joy, and peace. It's okay to rest. It's okay to take up space. It's okay to be human. So, if you're feeling overwhelmed, if you're stuck in the cycle of toxic motivation, if you're carrying a weight that feels too heavy to bear, take a breath. Close your laptop. Take a nap. Call a friend. Do whatever you need to do to remind yourself that you are enough, just as you are. And remember, this isn't a race. It's not about getting it right or reaching some imaginary finish line. It's about learning to be kind to yourself along the way. Because you, my friend, are worth it. As I began to embrace the idea that I was enough, that I didn't have to earn my worth through endless striving, something unexpected happened. It wasn't just my relationship with myself that changed. It was my relationship with everything and everyone around me. I started to notice how much of my life had been driven by fear. Fear of failure, fear of judgment, fear of not being enough. That fear had seeped into my work, my friendships, even the way I moved through the world. It made me defensive, guarded, always braced for the next blow. But as I let go of that fear, I began to soften. I became more open, more curious, more willing to take risks. The ripple in relationships. One of the first places I noticed this shift was in my relationships. I'd always been the kind of person who tried to fix things, to swoop in with advice or solutions whenever someone I cared about was struggling. But as I learned to be kinder to myself, I realized that what people really needed wasn't fixing. They needed to be seen, heard, and held, just like I did. So I started to listen differently. Instead of jumping in with solutions, I'd sit with people in their pain. I'd ask questions. I'd say, "That sounds really hard. How can I support you?" And the funny thing was, the less I tried to fix, the more connected I felt. It was as if by letting go of the need to control, I'd created space for something deeper and more authentic to emerge. The ripple in work. Work was trickier. Old habits die hard. And the pressure to perform was still there, lurking in the background. But as I began to untangle my worth from my productivity, I noticed a shift in how I approach my work. I started to focus less on what I thought I should be doing and more on what felt meaningful and aligned. I began to say no to things that drained me and yes to things that lit me up. I started to take breaks without guilt, to ask for help when I needed it, to celebrate small wins instead of rushing to the next goal. And the strangest thing happened. My work didn't suffer. In fact, it got better because I was no longer operating from a place of fear and scarcity. I had more energy, more creativity, more joy to pour into what I was doing. The ripple in the world. The biggest surprise, though, was how this shift began to ripple out into the world. I started to notice how many people were carrying the same weight I'd been carrying, the weight of not feeling enough. And I realized that by being kinder to myself, I was giving others permission to do the same. It wasn't anything grand or dramatic. It was small. Abaidai moments. A smile to a stranger. A kind word to a coworker. A moment of genuine presence with a friend. These tiny acts of kindness, born out of my own journey, began to create a ripple effect. And I realized that the more I embraced my own humanity, the more I was able to see and honor the humanity in others. The moral: kindness is contagious. If there's a second moral to this story, it's this: kindness is contagious. When you learn to be kind to yourself, it doesn't just change you, it changes the world around you. It creates a ripple effect that touches everyone you meet in ways you may never fully see or understand. So, if you're feeling stuck, if you're carrying a weight that feels too heavy to bear, remember this: the most radical thing you can do is to be kind to yourself, to rest when you're tired, to celebrate your wins, no matter how small, to let go of the need to be perfect and embrace the messy, beautiful, imperfect reality of being human. And as you do, know that you're not just helping yourself. You're creating a ripple that will touch the lives of everyone around you. Because when you choose kindness for yourself and for others, you're making the world a little softer, a little brighter, a little more alive. Even now, after all the growth and healing, the journey isn't over. Some days, I still feel the pull of old habits, the urge to prove myself, the fear of not being enough. But now, I have tools, I have practices, I have a deeper understanding of who I am and what I need. And most importantly, I have compassion for myself and for the journey. The practice of self-compassion. Self-compassion has become my anchor. It's not about letting myself off the hook or avoiding responsibility. It's about recognizing that I'm human. That I'm going to mess up, and that's okay. It's about treating myself with the same kindness and understanding I'd offer a friend. When I feel myself slipping back into old patterns, I pause. I take a deep breath, and I ask myself what I need right now. Sometimes the answer is rest. Sometimes it's a walk outside or a conversation with a loved one. Sometimes it's just sitting with the discomfort and reminding myself that it's okay to feel this way. The power of community. Another thing I've learned is that I don't have to do this alone. For so long, I thought I had to figure everything out on my own, that asking for help was a sign of weakness. But the truth is, we're not meant to navigate life alone. We're meant to lean on each other, to share our struggles and our triumphs, to remind each other that we're not alone. I've found so much strength in community, in the friends who listen without judgment, in the mentors who offer wisdom and guidance, in the strangers who share their stories and remind me that we're all in this together. And I've learned that asking for help isn't a sign of weakness. It's a sign of strength. It's an acknowledgement that we're human, that we need each other, and that there's beauty in that interdependence. The beauty of imperfection. One of the most profound shifts has been in how I view imperfection. I used to see it as something to be fixed, something to be ashamed of. But now, I see it as a source of beauty and connection. It's in our imperfections that we find our humanity, our vulnerability, our capacity for growth. I've learned to embrace the messiness of life, the ups and downs, the twists and turns, the moments of joy and sorrow. I've learned to see my mistakes not as failures, but as opportunities to learn and grow. And I've learned to celebrate the small, imperfect moments that make life so rich and meaningful. The moral: the journey is the destination. If there's a final moral to this story, it's this: the journey is the destination. Life isn't about reaching some perfect, finished state. It's about embracing the process, the growth, the becoming. It's about learning to be kind to yourself, to lean on others, to find beauty in the messiness. So, if you're feeling stuck, if you're carrying a weight that feels too heavy to bear, remember this: you don't have to have it all figured out. You don't have to be perfect. You just have to keep showing up. one step at a time. And as you do, know that you're not alone. You're part of a beautiful, messy, imperfect human family, all doing the best we can. This story is for anyone who's ever felt like they're not enough, for anyone who's ever pushed themselves to the brink, only to realize they've lost themselves in the process. For anyone who's ever needed a reminder that it's okay to just be. You are enough, and you always have been. And as you continue on this journey, know that you're not alone. We're all in this together, learning, growing, and finding our way. And that, in itself, is a beautiful thing. I'm so glad you spent this time with me. If you like the story, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more. Take care, and see you next time.